Hey everybody, and welcome to the next video for the project Build a Data Analysis Library from Scratch in Python. In this video, we're going to be completing step 4, implementing the dunder-len special method. So in the last video, we finished right here. We completed this convert Unicode to object method. The result of that was stored in the underscore data attribute. So this is where our dictionary of data will reside for the rest of the project. So we're going to be accessing this underscore data attribute frequently throughout to find where our data is stored internally. Now you'll notice there are a couple other lines of code here at the bottom of the constructor. So these are actually already implemented for you, and we are not going to cover them right now. So with that said, the initialization, the dunder init constructor method is complete. So all the methods in here are fully implemented. There's no other things to do. There's no other code to be written for any of these methods. So let's go ahead and skip on down to our current step, which involves completing this method, the dunder-len special method. So this is a method we're going to use to return the number of rows in our data frame. So this is a special method, which means this gets called whenever the len function is used with our object. So whenever you use len and then pass in our data frame df, it will return that's what it'll return. It'll call this dunder-len method, and it'll run the code, and whatever returns that will get returned. So this is what you use to make the len method work with your object, or the len function work with your object. Okay, so to do this, we need to get one of the NumPy arrays in our underscore data dictionary and return the length of that array, since they all have the same exact length. So I'm going to show you a couple ways on how to do this. Number one, we're going to work on iterating. We're just going to iterate through all the values of the array with a for loop, and then return the length of one of the values that we come across. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're just going to write a simple for loop for value in self dot underscore data. So this is where our data dictionary is stored, and we're going to use the values method of the dictionary, which returns, which creates an iterable of all the NumPy arrays in this case. Now we don't actually have to loop through all of them. Since they're all the same length, we'll just write a return statement in here, and this should be good. This should be good enough. So this should work. So we're just going to begin an iteration through the values, and then return the length of that value. Now, you're wondering, well, why can we do this? Well, value is a NumPy array. NumPy arrays already work with the len function. So we are piggybacking off of NumPy to do all the hard work for us. We're just simply we're using the len function on a NumPy array to see if that works. So let's go ahead and run the test here. So it's called test underscore len. I'm just going to go ahead and execute that to see if the test passed, and indeed it passed, so we're good to go here. I want to show you how this looks in a Jupyter notebook, so I'm going to hop on over to the Jupyter notebook down here. So again, just to quickly cover this, we have made 3 data frames, one for Pandas Cub, one for Pandas Cub Final, and one for Pandas itself. So df is the one in Pandas Cub. So now when I call len, or pass df into len, what's really happening is the dunder-len special method is being called, and it's right here. So this is exactly what's being called. So you can actually call this directly, and you typically would never do this since it should only be called internally, but you can do it like this and call it directly. So what happens whenever Python sees this len, it will translate this into the dunder-len method and call that on your object. So that is exactly what Python is doing. So we are good to go into the next step, but I want to show an alternative way of doing this. So you might think that why can't we just get the first array by indexing it with the brackets and selecting it like that? So why not? Why can't we just do something like this? Well, it turns out this object that it returns, it's not a list. It's called a dict view, I believe, or something similar, and it does not allow indexing. So when I run this, if I try to run this code, I will get an error. So this dict values object does not support indexing. So it's trying to do this right here, but it fails. So it does not support indexing. Now we can still do this in a different manner. So I'm going to go back to the values. Now this is an iterable object, as we saw. We can loop through all the values in a for loop. But if you don't want to actually write the for loop, you can do something a little tricky, and it's a little bit more advanced, and that is to create an iterator out of this. So the iterator is the object that is actually sort of like doing the iteration, and we can do this with the iter function. So you can actually see here VS Code has popped up. It will return iterator. So this is something that you can manually iterate through by using what's called the next function. So iter is a function. It's just a built-in function in Python. It's not used often, but we're going to go ahead and use it now. So to get the very first value in the iteration, we can use next. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to pass this into next. So this, now what we've done is we have the very first NumPy array in our dictionary. Okay, so then we can just we can pass this to len. So now we have a NumPy array, and we can return this. And now we can pass the test. So just to unpack this once again. So first of all, self._data is our dictionary of strings mapped to NumPy arrays. .values is a dictionary method that returns this dict values object, and it does not support indexing, so we cannot use the brackets there. Iter returns an iterator, which is the thing that you can iterate over, in a for loop. So this is actually what the for loop is doing. It's creating an iterator sort of behind the scenes for you to iterate through. Next is how you could manually iterate through this. So next we'll get the very next one, and then len. The very next one is a NumPy array. We finally got to that one NumPy array, and then we can just take the length of that and returns the number that we want, which is whatever the length of our data frame is. So now if I run the test again, you can see that it's passed. So we're good to go. So this is a way to do this in a single line of code without using a for loop explicitly. So this is sort of a manual way of setting up a for loop. You can do this with anything that's iterable, like a list. You can pass in a list here, and or whatever, and it would do the same thing. It would make an iterator. Next would give you the very first object in that list. So it's like sort of a manual way of doing a for loop. And the only reason we want to do that in this case is because we don't want to loop through all of them, and we cannot use this. We cannot use indexing to grab the very first element. So I'll just go ahead and leave this one right here and say that this method is, or this step is now complete, and we can move on to step 5.